Hello and welcome to Geek Warning, the podcast that puts the world's most interesting cycling tech into one place. I'm Dave Rome, and joining me this week, once again, full panel, Brad Copeland. How are you doing?
I am wonderful, Dave. Good to be back.
Great. And Suvi Lopanen, how are you doing?
I have been better, but I'm also
You're a bit
glad
under the
to
weather.
be back. Yeah, slightly.
Okay, all right. Well, I guess, not feeling so well. I can assume that you've probably spent the week feeling sorry for yourself, but anything else been keeping you busy this week?
I mean, not really. I've been raiding the supermarket meds shelves, looking at different remedies for colds.
Oh, no.
And just work.
Yeah,
Other than that, very unexciting week for me.
What's on the work calendar?
Some weight limits chats,
Interesting.
some
Okay.
sustainability pieces, and some prescription eyewear things. All in the
Okay.
works. So whole mix.
What do you think people listening will see on the site first?
I think the prescription cycling glasses will be up soon. There has been a lot to learn in that one.
Like a buyer's guide for people that need prescription eyewear and that want it on the bike.
Yep, pretty much. Yeah.
Nice.
It's been interesting because I need prescription eyewear myself, so I've learned a
really?
lot from myself
Okay.
as well.
Oh, perfect. Okay. It's great when you can... I'm guilty of this. I often choose topics that I'm personally interested in, and then it's just pure selfish journalism at that point. So, but anyway, that's the name of the game. Brad, what about you? What have you been working on?
Oh, just seems like I'm swapping a lot of front ends around on road bikes these days.
Oh,
They're my primary function in life. Handlebar swaps, fork replacements, you name it. We had a few rings of death.
again.
Well, some that were resolved, let's say, since they were
Okay.
discovered. But yeah, sometimes there's a little bit of a lag between finding one and getting a manufacturer to send a fork out. So, just addressing that. But I will say, very commendable on behalf of our listeners, those of whom, at least, who have brought their bikes in, having heard our warnings. We've had a few visitors to the shop specifically because of the Ring of Death.
Ah, okay.
Yes, so one of whom, at least one, was actually found with the problem itself, and then some others who brought it in, but we're fortunate to have escaped this time around. So, but again, a good reminder, if you have a fork with a carbon steer tube and your headset's loose, don't delay, get that thing checked out to and take it to a shop if needed. And if you notice your headset is a little bit loose, definitely don't keep riding it, would be the other important tidbit in that
Nice.
in the conversation of the Ring of Death. I think the longer you ride it loose, the more likely you are to develop the very problem that has been a topic of ours a number of times.
Indeed. Well, there you go. PSA right off the bat.
Right off the bat.
Yeah. Well, this episode, I guess we're going to do things a little bit differently from our other more common format. We'll have some tech news at the end of the episode. But yeah, this week we've got something on our minds. We've got to pick one. Of course, Ask a Wrench. We're going to answer some member questions there. And then, you'll hear a few little tech tidbits of new things from the last week. But yeah, as a reminder, Geek Warning is produced and created and it belongs to Escape Collective. And Escape Collective is a wholly member-funded organization. So yeah, our goal is to be fully independent of the industry that we cover. And the way that we do that is through memberships and subscriptions. We don't have advertising, we don't have affiliate links, and we don't have sponsored content. So yeah, this podcast only exists through your support. So please head to escapecollective.com/member and sign up if you haven't already. And yeah, I guess along those lines, signing up gives you warm, fuzzy feelings for making this content exist, but also it gives you access to member exclusive content. So a good example of that is our member exclusive podcast that we're doing almost weekly at this point. And the most recent one was with Gerard Vrooman of Open Cycles and former co-founder of Cervelo, and talking all things like 650B wheels and bike design and why we're seeing a number of gravel bikes ditching 650B compatibility in order to just go 700C only. We dive into that topic. So yeah, plenty to listen to, and please sign up. All right, Suvi, Brad, I guess, to kick things off, I think let's start with what's been on our minds, and I'm selfishly going to suggest a topic here, which is comes off the back of a bike I just built up for myself which was already my own bike, and I wrote about it in a Staff Joyrides piece, which is my Salsa Chili Con Crosso cyclocross bike, which is a bike that I don't use a lot, but I've given a new lease of life to by putting a flat handlebar on it, and now I have a little short errand bike to rip around on. And it got me thinking, which is, what's the bike that you have that you won't let go of? What's the one that you're forever going to hoard? Suvi?
I don't think I have an as exciting of a bike as you do. I really enjoyed reading your Salsa Joyrides piece. It was excellent. I have let go of a lot of bikes, and I think I have learned by moving around the world to let go of a lot of things. So I think I've just let go of more bikes than I've maybe kept. But I do currently I got last year a steel bike built by a small frame builder. Yeah, an independent frame builder. And even though the bike wasn't necessarily what we intended it to be, it did not turn out perfect.
Oh.
It will need a new iteration. I think that's probably going to be a bike that I will keep hold of and just try to make it work for one purpose or another. And it will kind of remind me of, things that can go wrong.
I want to know what went wrong.
Yeah, is that something you can share? Is it a builder you want to mention, or?
I don't think I will share everything that went on.
Okay.
Just to say, it was a long project. And then, there were a lot of side tangents to it. So I think it's a story to be told at another time, maybe. Maybe once I've got another one, like the new version of this bike, I can share the whole how we got to that point.
Gotcha. Okay, but the original one that wasn't quite right. To ask the same question again, what gives it character? I
think it's the fact that it's built for me still, and I think also the fact that it isn't perfect. I think all the bikes that I've had that I've been sentimental about and I've not really wanted to let go of, and then when I've shed some tears even. I think they've never been quite perfect, but I've just learned to really love them. You know, it's just kind of like we've gone through a lot together, and then I've just learned no bike's really perfect, but this is it's a bike that I can ride, and we've experienced so much, the ups and downs.
What do you use it for? What type of bike is it? It's
a gravel bike. Yeah,
it's a gravel bike. Okay.
Currently, it doesn't.
But
have
it only fits 28s. Is that the issue?
No.
But I'm not far off, judging by that response.
No. It does fit. It does fit 45. Yeah.
Oh, okay. All right. That's
I can probably squeeze a bit more at the front, but yeah.
Oh, cool. Okay.
Yeah.
Nice. Okay. Well, I look forward to you writing about that one day. I'd love to hear more, because it's piqued my interest.
I will.
Brad, what's the one that you? I think I know. Can I answer?
You can answer. Yeah.
Is it your California? Your Cervelo California?
It is. Yes, it is, my dear beloved. Occasionally mentioned on other episodes as well.
Yeah.
Cervelo Project California, the first version, the R5CA. It's a bike that's now almost 12 years old, 13 years old, but still a wonderful bike, a beautiful bike. It was a kind of one of those handmade by the engineering staff at operate like a loss because of the sort of homologation requirements for raceability. At the time, it was definitely one of, if not the lightest production frame sets ever offered. It was also kind of astronomically priced that made it sort of unattainable. And I was fortunate enough to be in a bike shop where some other measures besides monetary transactions led to me acquiring the bike and trading in an old bike that was sold and kind of blah, blah, blah. But I managed to get my hands on the last 58 centimeter one available to the public. So,
wow.
And it's, by now, speaking of only clearance for a 28, that's actually true. But it's a little bit irrelevant by modern standards, in terms of it being a rim brake bike with some tire width limitations and so forth. But it's, for 58 centimeter, it's like, I want to give you like 5.8, I think, is the kilogram weight, but 12.8 pounds was the empirical weight, I guess. And for 58, there was like a daily driver. I thought that was a pretty respectable achievement, and a very reliable bike, very nice in all conditions. And just love the bike. And I have kind of nostalgic feelings for the time and the place that it came from. And so, You know how it is. It's kind of like Suvi's story. No matter what, that's just sometimes that there's a feeling attached that you are reluctant to abandon. So that's mine.
Does it ride really nicely?
Yes, it really does. It really does. It was from that era of when the R5 first debuted. Anyway, when even the previous, like the R3SL, they had those notoriously thin, kind of pencil thin seat stays, and there were some prototypes of the R5CA shown among. At the time, I guess it was the Cervelo test team, which was the world tour team that Cervelo was sponsoring. I think it evolved from CSC. That might be true. We can fact check that one. I'm pretty sure that's true. At the time, Tor Hushovd was famously winning a lot of green jerseys and tour stages, the Norwegian champion. And there was some photos of him riding a prototype R5CA that had no seat stays at all. And they were only there basically because UCI required bikes to have triangular shapes in the back. And so, but it was kind of structurally unnecessary, and it's kind of a unique construction, at least for that time, for how they actually assembled and kind of laid up the carbon in these bikes and achieved the performance that they did. So it was kind of a neat engineering exercise too that's different than a lot of bikes.
That was right at the timeline before bike ride quality went out the window in favor of like absolute chasing of stiffness to weight, which was I blame Tour magazine for, out of Germany, because they'd set up test protocols that like brands like Canyon and a few other names had really chased after just winning that test. So they're just like pure stiffness to weight without really considering how it rides. And yeah, I think your Cervelo is perhaps from a couple of years before that pursuit, where ride quality was still in mind, or at least Cervelo kept with that pursuit. So yeah,
I think now with like sort of wheels and tires, especially tires and volume and pressures, you can kind of offset some of the, let's say, lack of ride quality or the lack of nuanced ride quality in modern frames, because you can kind of get it from somewhere else.
You can hide it.
Yeah, back in the my Cervelo days, it was uncommon to be wider than 25 millimeters. And in fact, it has 22 millimeter tubulars on it right now, which was my go-to. But needless to say, the ride quality was, you could feel it more because you could feel everything more. So you could appreciate how good it was. Yeah.
Yeah. Nice. Well, yeah, I guess with that, like, what is it about these bikes that I guess, makes it the one that you wouldn't let go of? Is it the fact that it's, like, for you, Brad, it sounds like it's the rarity and the time of your life when you did acquire it?
Yeah, and it was like a group project, kind of, almost. I mean, it was mine to build, but it was the shop I was at the time. It was actually the shop that Greg, who I now am working with again here in DC, we were at together in Arlington, Virginia, which is across the river, but basically the same neck of the woods. And we had a good crew in there, and when you have all the buddies kind of trying to outdo each other with who can build the coolest one, that was sort of how this came to be. And so I played my trump card and got sort of the most exclusive bike kind of out at the time, and hard one to top. But we had a good time kind of playing that game. And so
who in their 20s can be the most reckless with their finances?
I showed them a new trick or two with that. So yeah, so still recovering from that financial endeavor, but it was a fun time and just a good group of guys that we've all gone our separate ways and scattered around, but it was a kind of a time and a place too that made that bike feel special too.
Yeah, nice. Suvi, anything to add on that?
Well, I definitely wasn't going the same route with my bike.
No.
It wasn't meant to be. I mean, it's a special build, definitely, and it's I think special in that I have built it from kind of scratch myself as well. It's not a stock build or anything like that. So I think that does add to the special aspect of any bike. I think the same as what you described in yourself. So like to just you're changing bits and bobs on it and just it's yours instead of it came out of the box and you just ride it. I think there's a different feel to it. Even though I have had bikes and that I have parted ways with that have come out of the box, and I've felt very sad about giving them back. So yeah.
All right. Well then, I guess on that, like, what's the bike that you have sold that at this point in life you regret doing so? Is there one that comes to mind for you, Suvi?
I don't think it's not a bike that I've sold, but it's a bike that I had on a long-term test, and then due to lack of space, gave back. Not just to a stranger on the street, like, here's a nice bike for you.
Sure.
It was the Lauf Segler that I rode, for a long while, and it was probably the first gravel bike that I was like, this is just like, it was just amazing to ride it on what I ride regularly around here in Glasgow. It was just a perfect bike for everything I was doing, and fitted me really well. And it was one of those bikes that straight out of the box, I was just, well, there was a few, I changed the handlebar, for example, it was too wide for me, but other than that, I was just so happy with it, and had great memories with it.
Did that have the True Grit fork on it, or was it the rigid fork?
True Grit, yeah. So it had suspension fork, yeah.
Interesting. Yeah, it is a cool bike. Brad, what do you wish you still had?
Well, there's a lot I wish I still had. I was unfortunately, I think like a lot of us, kind of in the sell one to get another one, kind of flipping the bikes routine growing up in the shop, when something new would come out and you'd purchase something previously at a employee discount or something like that. You could kind of sell one and buy the other and just kind of keep them rotating like that. And unfortunately, every year was not always a better year. And I had a couple cool bikes growing up that I would love to see again. But the one that probably was the most spectacular of those was I guess it was a model year 1999. It was a Merlin. One of the funnier names in all of bikes, the model was called the Fat Beat, which is a kind of combination of two borrowed technologies that went into the construction of this frame. The YB Beat rear end, which was a Moots pivotless titanium soft tail design, which was kind of a common type of sort of cross-country bike that was, I would say, an inch of travel is maybe being generous, but it was enough that it was certainly felt, and it is actually very effective, very lightweight way of achieving it. Just damped with a simple spring and elastomer. And the fork used a headshock fatty fork, which is like this dial before the lefty where the telescoping element of the fork kind of slid up and into the head tube. If you remember those, they were very common in the 90s. And
the bulletproof fork.
Yeah, well, it was
not for its absolute reliability, but just because Cannondale did a magazine ad that showed it being shot with a
yes. Exactly. And the one I had was like the last version before the lefty kind of took over and Cannondale's, at least the high end of their lineup. So it was the air sprung ultra fatty fork. So it was like a very lightweight, very stiff and rigid fork. The bike itself was, again, somewhat at the time I found problems that I would be willing to overlook now. It was a little bit laterally flexible given that it was made to be flexible vertically and achieve kind of some suspension without any pivots. But when I was racing, it was, if I put too wide of tires on, especially then the side knob, tires were a little bit knobbier back in those days, and at least like aggressively knobby, and I could kind of stand up and scrub the chainstays a little bit if I was really on it. And that was me at like 14, 15 years old when I didn't weigh that much and was not that powerful. So, Merlin is kind of one of those names in the legacy of bikes, some of the best craftsmanship and titanium frame building ever, including now. Just beautiful quality, and that particular spec, that bike kind of used some, pretty unusual combination of features that are, you rarely see one. They were kind of limited production in the first place, and it was just something I had my hands on and let go and didn't really think much about, so I could go on to the next one. And none of them were as good as that one was. So
yeah, my the one I regret still, which I truthfully probably wouldn't ride all that much, because I have a CAD 12 with rim brakes that I don't ride at all at the moment, but is a Cannondale CAD 9, which was the last of the Made in America CADs, and I let it go as a complete bike with like a brand new group set for like absolutely nothing, just because I thought I needed the money and thought I needed the space. But and the fact that I replaced that with a BMC Racemaster SLX, which is one of the most awful road riding bikes I've owned and ridden, makes it all the more worse. So yeah, I'm kind of these days I'm sad about that, and eventually ended up buying a CAD 12 because I missed the CAD 9 so much. But yeah, I think there's certainly some special things about those American made CADs, and that's the one that I shouldn't have sold, especially not for how much I sold it for. So yeah, that one hurts for me. But yeah, I had that one built up with like, I decided, I was working in a shop at that time, and I decided that every customer wanting a road bike was coming in asking for specifically for carbon fiber because they wanted lightweight. And I thought I'd just be a bit of a jerk and build the lightest bike in the shop out of aluminium. So I built that CAD 9 was down to 6.1 kilos of pedals. And yeah, it was first generation SRAM Force, which is then actually the group set that found its way under that Chili Con Crosso that I've just covered on Escape. So it was a cool bike. Shall we move on to a pick one? We haven't had a pick one for quite a while. And yeah, I guess this one, sorry, I'm hogging all the themes this week, but I'd like to hear your pick ones for side entry bottle cages. And for those that aren't familiar, most bottle cages, you need to bring the bottle in a direct path in line with the cage. So basically from straight line, and you need quite a lot of frame clearance in order to do that. Whereas a side entry bottle cage actually lets you put the bottle in from the side and take the bottle out from the side, which means, say you've got a low slung top tube, you can actually still get the bottle in and out without really having to fight it. So this is pretty much a necessity on just about any modern mountain bike, but it's also particularly useful for smaller bikes, regardless of the discipline. So yeah, if you're a smaller rider on a road bike, then side entry bottle cages might make a lot of sense, especially in that seat tube position. Or they've also come into prominence with gravel bikes, and people are running frame bags because often the bags get in the way, and side entry bottle cages solve for a lot of issues. So they've become increasingly popular. But Suvi, do you have bikes that need side entry bottle cages?
They would all need those, I think, because I ride tiny bikes. It's an absolute nuisance. And when you said about the frame bag, I mean, there's absolutely zero chance that regardless of what bottle cage I have, that there will be a frame bag on my bike.
Yeah, sure.
It's just, I've tried a tiny one at the very back. I can fit it in, but... Yeah. No, otherwise
you put a saddle bag in the main triangle, and that fills up the main triangle. Yeah,
pretty much. That's how it is. Yeah. But I don't think I really love proper side entry bottle cages. I don't necessarily love the way that they often have this little hook that you have to push the bottle in. But I do have on most of my bikes. I have the Elite Cannibal, which I think kind of is a side load. It has a very deep, I don't know how to describe it, but it cuts low on the sides. So it's easy to slot the bottle in even from the side. So those are the ones that I use mainly, I think, for the reason that they do fit my bottles even on the smaller frames, but then they're not proper kind of side load. I wouldn't mind.
Yeah, they're kind of a hybrid.
Exactly. I prefer that on the down tube. On the seat tube one, I could have a side load one because I'm not going to be using that as much on longer rides where I would need two bottles. But yeah, that's my preferred option.
Okay. So it's the action of having the side mount. Yeah, you kind of do have to hook the bottle in. It's not as natural feeling to get the bottle in and out of. So that makes sense. Yeah. Brad, do you have a pick one in this category?
Yeah, I do. So there's one, the model name is eluding me. So it's not the one I would necessarily pick, but I think they solved one problem of side entry cages. I believe it's a Synchros branded one that I encountered briefly in my stint with Scott. And I have to say, I also don't love the action of a side entry cage. It's often, the only times I've used them have been out of necessity when I'm, say, trying to run two bottles on a full suspension mountain bike. They're obviously with gravel bikes these days, even in my size, you can sometimes have frames that have 3-bottle mounts. And so in those cases too, if you wanted to carry a lot of water, you'd probably be forced to use a side entry cage. But the problem with side entry cages is depending on which side it opens and where you put it on your frame, it opens to one side or the other. So many brands, Specialized comes to mind, and we had some funny moments in shops where this didn't process until the order was processed and we only had one side. I wasn't involved in that, but nevertheless, we still talk about it to this day. But, if you have it on the down tube and it opens to the right, you put it on your seat tube, it's opening to the left. But they're often labeled as right or left. And so that's completely dependent upon where it's located. So the one I liked that I saw, there was a Synchros branded one, had a little, where it basically bolted to the frame, like an inner element of the cage itself could be rotated by flipping it 180 degrees, either top or bottom. So the side entry changed
a similar idea.
One side to the other, and you just had to have one product that it could be reversed. And yeah, I've seen that one. I haven't used that one, but
yes.
the one I've used that I liked a lot, and it was because of how well it held bottles, which I feel like is maybe something that they don't always do well, has been the specialized carbon, specifically Z-Cage. I think they call it Z-Cage 2, actually, but I never really saw the 1, so let's just call it the one that is common and still around. And that one was more than adequate on a mountain bike where it's, being ridden in rough terrain with large bottles in it. And I never dropped one. So it held on tight, but was still relatively easy to get them in and out while riding on trails, so it was like I kind of did everything you wanted without dropping any bottles, and wasn't as kind of convoluted like Suvi was describing how it can sometimes be to actually get the bottle in and out.
It is surprising that a bottle cage is a very simple thing, but it seems quite hard to get it right.
Oh,
I mean, just they're flying all over the place, like on gravel, just when you ride with other people, and it's hard to get it in, it's hard to get it out. It's just, it's really, and then they destroy your bottles. That's what I hate the most. Like certain types of cages just absolutely destroy them, and you've spent money on that nice bottle, and then it's just ruined.
Yeah, unfortunately, it's like often the bottle cages that hold tight are the ones that do more damage to the bottles, because they're like the friction taking the bottle in and out is just so high. But there are absolutely many, and that's kind of what makes this topic interesting, is like bottle cages in general. There are a lot of ones that actually don't hold the bottle all that well. If you hit a pothole on the road, they'll eject, but when you're off-road, the bottle just disappears the first bump. So yeah, but side entry is an even bigger problem because there's more ways to get the bottle out, which means there's more ways for the bottle to bounce out. So Brad, I'm going to agree with your pick one. I truly believe the Specialized Z-Cage 2 in the carbon because it's stiffer, but also the plastic one's quite fantastic. The cheaper plastic one is very good as well. But I believe that is truly the benchmark of side entry bottle cages that hold the bottle and are reliable. And I'm starting to see it being quite a copied cage as well. Like I recently was sent some bottle cages from Santa Cruz, which came with the Stigmata that I tested, which then I bought. Those were like basically a Z-Cage replica, but with Santa Cruz branding. And that company, whoever sent me that bike, had made that fatal mistake of sending me 2 of the same side cage. So yeah, it's a good reminder that if you are ordering yourself some side entry cages and you need 2 of them, chances are you need to order 1 left and 1 right, and then that'll let you access the bottle from the same side of the bike. If you order 2 lefts or 2 rights, then you'll have opposite entry for the bottle, and it's weird, but food for thought. So there you go. I think we've picked one. What a novelty.
Dave, I think that's the first time we've agreed on to pick one.
Is it?
I think so.
Yeah.
I could agree with you too as well. I mean, that's the Z-Cage is one of my favorite of the side actual side cages.
No, you picked your side.
But I did pick my side though, which is no side. It's just a halfway.
Yes, straight in.
Yeah.
Halfway.
No, your reasoning, Suvi, makes perfect sense because I've been using side entry cages for a long time, and there is still this like pause in my head every time, which is like, how does this bottle go back in?
Have you used Fidlocks? Yeah. What do you think of those?
Yep. So the Lauf Elia, which is their new mountain bike, which I have in for review, actually came with the latest Fidlock bottles because the space within the main frame is actually quite limited. So the only way you can carry 2 bottles within the main triangle is with Fidlock. I actually quite like the mechanism of getting the bottle in and out. Like, I think that part's good. For me, it's the bottle itself is not amazing. Like, it still, like, leaves a bunch of water in the bottom of it that you can't get out without opening it. And more frustratingly, I find that they rattle, which is kind of a no-no for me because I go to great lengths to not hear my bikes rattle. So, but yeah, I don't know. Have you used them, Suvi?
I have, yeah. And I tested that they had the titanium bottle as well for those.
Oh.
Which was, I mean, that's the bottle's fault, not the system's fault. I like the system and the softer bottles work fine, but the titanium one, I could not get any liquid come out of it. So it meant like I was perched on my rides because I had to stop, and then I was squeezing with 2 hands, and I was trying everything. I was like, "There's just not enough water coming out of this," so it was not a great bottle. Yeah. So I would not recommend going that for that. I don't know. Maybe it might be also my grip strength. I had realized like my hands are not the strongest, but yeah, it was not the greatest bottle. But
is the titanium bottle compressible a little bit, supposedly? Like, can you squeeze it?
Yeah, you can, like, tiny bit, because it's not, it's not completely titanium. It's, like, enforced, I think. That was the material. Yeah, it's not full, like, titanium. It's not rigid. Yeah. I wasn't trying to...
I was like, whoa. Seems like a major oversight if you can't squeeze the bottle.
Yeah. But no, it's supposed to be. It was very good for not picking up any taste or odors or anything like that. It was really, really good for that, but it was horrible. But I do like the aesthetic of the Fitlock system as well, just that you don't have cages, just the little bolts.
It is the most space efficient. Like if you're really tight on frame space, it is very good in that regard. Like the ability to twist a bottle out on itself basically is quite cool. But yeah, they're not without downside, unfortunately. So
how easy is it to get the bottle back in on the fly? It's easy. I haven't used them.
Yeah. I mean, I'd used the first generation Fidlock and found they ejected the bottles and rattled and were awful, and I'd kind of skipped like 3 generations since then, and this is my next opportunity.
I remember Gen 1 and they were just problematic for everyone, and so I kind of just assumed that's how it was and didn't.
Yeah,
I never returned.
I kind of hadn't. Yeah, I'd kind of given up on the concept. But these actually seem to locate really easily, and like I'd say within the first hour of using them, I was kind of like nailing getting the bottle back in place just as quick as I could with any other cage. So, there's like a magnetic latch that kind of draws it back in. So,
right.
They're pretty good in that regard. It's just for me the rattle is kind of the current deal breaker. But anyway. I'll keep playing with that one and try solving the rattle for them. Cool. All right. Well, yeah, there we have it. Pick one. All right. We'll take a very quick break and we'll be back in a sec with Ask a Wrench. All right. First question that we have is from Tom of Sheffield in the UK. So let's hear that question.
I find I go through my disc brake pads really quickly here. So for context, it's a really hilly area riding with a lot of steep, narrow road descents, so a lot of braking. Conditions are not great. It rains a lot. And yeah, I'm finding with the Shimano resin brake pads I'm using, they don't last. Like I've gone through 3 or 4 sets from probably March to now on my summer bike. So that means a new rotor as well, right? So it's getting quite expensive. Do you think switching to sintered would last longer? I'm pretty skeptical about switching to finned pads because I think that's just a bit of a gimmick and I'm not sure they really work, but have to be told otherwise. Using 160 rotors front and rear, I don't think I can go any bigger on the bike. I've seen there's products available that, Peak Torque makes one, but I don't think that fits my bike and I'm a bit skeptical of that anyway. Yeah, any inputs, welcome. Thanks.
All right, Brad, I think this one's right up your alley. Any thoughts?
Yes, I have many thoughts, Dave and Tom. Hey, thanks for your question, first of all. And good for you to get out there riding when it's wet and nasty. That's always been a tough hurdle to overcome on my side. But I do have one suggestion for you. Rather than focus on the fins of the pads, which I will say, just to, in my opinion, they do something. It's more for heat dissipation though than it is to actually prolong any wear characteristics. It's kind of to keep the operating temperatures low and specifically the fluid kind of from overheating in the hose that's near your caliper, which can happen under heavy braking and prolonged braking. So don't discount that, but it sounds like what you're experiencing are a lot of kind of hard braking, but not necessarily for long periods of time as you're going up and down some hilly terrain in the wet conditions. So what you may want to consider instead is switching to a metallic compound pad, and you're running Shimano. They call it a metal sintered pad. Typically, if you go into your bike shop and ask for a metal pad that's compatible with your brake caliper, they'll know exactly what to give you. There will be options, as Shimano has quite a incredible number of brake pads that they manufacture. There will be a finned option and a non-finned option. I would say for you, it doesn't necessarily matter, but I think the more important characteristic here is going to be the compound of the pad material itself. And the metal pads do run a little bit noisier typically, even in dry conditions, but the maximum power is a little bit higher, typically speaking, and the wear characteristics are quite a bit longer. So when I was working as a pro mechanic for athletes, for like wintertime and training bikes, I would always use metal pads. A lot of that's because the riders themselves are not particularly good at maintenance and paying attention to things. And so it would kind of buy me some time, and they would often go riding before I did this and would come back having worn through pads all the way down to the metal backing plate and beyond. So this was exactly why I started switching to metal pads, and I think that would serve you here as well.
Yeah. Suvi, you're from a wet part of the world in Scotland. I assume you've used metallic pads and heard them in the rain. Care to share the main issue there?
I mean, the issue is just it's going to hurt your ears and your fellow riders' ears. But I do agree.
A little squealy.
Yeah, they're a little squealy, but I think if you want to save some money, like not swap your pads all the time and not run them to the backing, it's kind of worth it. Even though, yeah, I would ride resin pads mostly, I think, because I like the quiet. But disclaimer that I will also not go out as much in the rain anymore as I used to. And when I used to commute, I would definitely put, metallic pads in because it's just worth it in the long run. Or what I also got told when I said that my brake pads would wear out is just to brake less, but I would not recommend that because I think when it's very steep downhills, you do want to brake. So that's not my recommendation. Just
brakes are important. But yeah, so metallic pads versus resin, I would say like very approximately, but 2 to 3 times the durability.
I was going to say 3 times is my rough guess too. Yeah.
Yeah. And yeah, so as Brad kind of covered, the max power, at least once they've got heat in them, is typically tends to be greater. The flip side of that, though, is that you kind of lose a little bit of modulation through the brake. So that sort of like ability to feather the brakes, they become a little bit grabbier with heat in the system. So if you like that sort of softer bite, then kind of that's where resin comes in. And yeah, as Suvi touched on, resin is still the answer if you want really quiet brakes. The downside is the durability. So
I would say one thing though as well when I was commuting, that if you do have mudguards, I don't know if Tom has mudguards on, I feel I'm gonna use the word crap. Everything just gets into the brakes, and I think it was quite hard to keep them clean. Which also in the wet weather it wears them out, I feel, quicker because all the grit gets in there. And maybe that's another thing to do if Tom can do it, to try to keep them cleaner, especially if running mudguards. Like I feel that kind of when I started hosing my bike down a bit more frequently and paying attention to getting the grit out of the brake pads as well. And yeah, between the pads, it helped that a little bit at least.
Yeah, okay.
Because there's a lot of grit on the roads as well here. Just, and it all washes up into the pads and everywhere. So
yeah, certainly a good tip. Yeah, I mean, I wouldn't be really recommending any like heavy brake cleaners or anything like that, but just like really just rinsing off the bike from time to time is probably going to get a lot of that grit out. And then, I guess the only other thing is like officially brake manufacturers will say that if you're swapping brake pad compounds, you need to match it. You need to change your rotors because the pad material embedded into the rotor is then different. If you're not too fussed about pure brake performance, you're probably okay to continue using your existing rotors, but yeah, certainly just be aware of that for best performance and best chance of not having noise and all that, you probably will need to match the rotors. So we'll start fresh with the rotors. Anything to add on that one, or should we move to the next one?
No, that sounds good. And it sounds like, and I would just affirm that Tom's suspicion that based on the amount of pads he's worn through, he's probably in new rotor territory already, which he himself suggested is the case. And I'd say that probably is the case. There are wear thickness minimums that usually is printed on your rotor. And you can measure that, or a shop can measure that and actually confirm if your rotor is in fact completely worn out or or not. But yeah, if you're going to switch compounds and you already have a pretty worn rotor, it would probably be good to get new ones no matter what, and start with a fresh bedding in process with the new material of pad that you're using, should you choose to take our advice here.
Yep, for sure. Just on rotor thickness, I mean, as Brad said, it's printed on the rotor. Minimum thickness for a Shimano is like 1.5 millimeters, and it starts at 1.8, so it's not a big thickness difference. You do need calipers to measure this, and I guess the one thing to note is typical vernier calipers or your digital calipers with like flat jaws are not necessarily the best tool for doing this, because often rotors will sort of wear with like a top lip above them. So if you use a flat caliper across it, it's you're not actually going to be measuring the most worn part of the rotor. It might give you a bit of a false result. So you kind of need a thickness caliper or thickness gauge to measure from the center of the rotor. Food for thought. Micrometer is very good for this. There's also little thickness gauge tools you can get, but little tidbit on that. All right, let's move on to the next question. We have a question from a Faily Kretz. Let's listen to. I think this is a fake name. All right, let's listen.
I got a purely hypothetical question. So let's say I wanted to mount up a new rear shock on my mountain bike. I take the old shock off. I'm getting ready to put the new shock on. And I realize that the mounting hardware I have is not quite right. So scrounging around, looking around at other bikes and other old shocks I've got sitting around. I've got 95% of it working, right? So like most of it's correct. It's all the right sizes, 20 mil front and rear, little XC bike. The last thing I'm missing is on the sort of swing arm side of the shock. I've got the bushings. I've got the little metal thing that goes in the inside of the bushings. I don't know what you call that. What I'm missing are the two little crush washers with the little dots on them. I have them for 22 mil width, but not a 20 mil width. I'm just saying purely hypothetically, if I don't feel like waiting for these to show up and shop in town doesn't have any of the right size, could I just sort of center the shock on that bushing and just ride it? How bad would that be? Let's just purely hypothetically. Thanks for answering.
I was puzzled by Faily's failure here. I reached out and got more information on this one because I wanted to know, why didn't he just use the hardware that came off the shock that he was taking off the bike?
I'm guessing he's going from like a RockShox to a Fox or something like that, going between brands.
It was exactly that. So even then, aren't they compatible if you change bushings?
You know, I've never really explored this and interchanging the small parts that he's describing. I haven't actually tried this.
They're different, but I think they both run on half-inch by half-inch eyelets, I believe.
That's true. That's true. Yeah, I mean, exactly. And so because you can obviously swap the shocks out, and so they do have compatible specs. And so yeah, one of my thoughts that I had, and this isn't necessarily my advice because I haven't actually done this or tried this, but they are plastic. They do deform somewhat under compression. What happens if you put the ones you have, which you say are for 22 mil, what happens if you put them on and tighten it down? Out of curiosity. My real answer is get the right ones. But I haven't tried this. And although it sounds like a fake name, it sounds like a very real scenario that's currently unfolding. I'd be cautious running it in a real mountain biking scenario, running it without those crush washers present at all. So yeah, I've gone through a similar situation where I ended up with a shock. I got a new shock and it was for a bike, and it was a very specific shock, and it was missing those pieces, and it was a little bit of a chore to track them all down. But I think it's, in the end, although I know you're eager to get going on your new shock, you might want to maybe follow through. 95% of it working right is 5% of it working wrong. So I would be cautious to jump the gun and not have everything to spec.
I would be a little more cautious than that, which is if you have insufficient width in your shock hardware, then it is possible that you will crush the frame upon tightening that bolt. That the frame will actually flex or crack in order to try clamp down onto the available width that is there. So I would advise against having insufficient width in the shock eyelet. And I think that also extends to a question I had from someone a week ago, which was how exact do they need to be in terms of matching frame pivot bearings? If they're replacing frame pivot bearings, do they need to be exactly the same? And hell, yes, they do.
I don't know how it would even go, if it could even go together.
Yeah.
Well, God, people can find ways to make it go together, but
yeah.
Yeah. That's a very, very tight tolerances in all of those bearing points and linkages and stuff. So to play with the tolerances is to create unnecessary load or potential for failure somewhere in the system, and that's the last thing you want. So
all of that stuff is like stacked dimensions, and it's if you don't provide adequate width and dimensions for those things, when you do tighten the bolt, something's going to move to make up for that slack. You will in those cases typically end up cracking a frame. Is typically the only outcome that can happen. So stick to what came out of the bike and what the manufacturer had intended, because that's one part of the bike that unfortunately doing it wrong does typically end in frame breakage. So be warned. Anyway, I hope that helps, Kaylee. Sorry, Fayley and Fayley. It's just such a familiar voice. Anyway. All right. Next question and lucky last for this week is a question from John. So let's hear John's question.
Hello, Geek Warning crew. I have a question about a Chainline on a 1x conversion project I'm working on. I'm switching my wife's bike from a 2x9 Sora group set to a 1x11 GRX 600 with a 40-tooth chainring and an 11-42 rear cassette. And I'm finding that the Chainline is much further outbound than I was anticipating. It's a slightly older bike with a 135mm dropout, and so with this new configuration, a straight chainline puts the chain on about the third or fourth smallest cog. The bike falls within the Shimano compatibility guidelines I could find, though, at least with regard to chainstay length. So my question is this something I need to worry about? Is it going to make using the large cogs at the back difficult or just unpleasant? And if I should worry, what's the best solution? I was thinking about maybe trying to add some chainring bolt spacers to move the ring inbound a little bit, but I would love to hear your opinion on it. Thanks.
Okay. Brad, do you have any thoughts on this one?
Yeah, and I think John kind of is on the right track here. This might be a little bit of a tricky one to answer without a little bit of trial and error involved on John's part. A lot of it comes down to the chain line and subsequent kind of, like he said, he has a bike with a 135 mil rear spacing. Most modern 1x road groups, including the GRX 1x11 group that he has, are usually based around a 142, like a more modern spacing rear end and subsequent chain line because of the more outboard position of the cassette on the wider rear end of the bike. So it's a game of millimeters here. And what it sounds like is you're a few millimeters, I would say 3 to 5, probably too far outboard right now, especially given that you say it's straight on like the third smallest cog. And your question about what will happen is, it kind of depends. You're most likely going to get a lot of noise. You might get some chain retention issues when you're in the largest cogs, in other words, the easiest cogs in the back, because of the extreme chain line that you're going to be, forcing the chain into. If it's a fresh chain ring, it probably is going to stay on, but you may have it want to jump off to the inside, basically, of the chain ring, because, the angle from the large cog to the chain ring is going to be so extreme that it's going to almost want to peel the chain off to the inside. So that's going to be a risk that it may not do it in the work stand, but it may do it when you're out riding, which is kind of the place you don't want it to happen, especially when you're not prepared. So if you have the opportunity, and it sounds like you do, if you can space that chain ring inboard more, like with little spacers behind the spider tabs, they make specific spacers for things.
Wheels manufacturing,
just like you're describing. Yep. Yes, they're a source of many solutions to common problems in the bike industry, and they have good, high quality, relatively affordable kits, which include chainring spacers of all dimensions, as well as spacers that go behind the bolts if you have, too long of a bolt and you need to shorten its effective length or whatever the case. So they're very handy for single speed conversions and projects like this, which Dave just had a little bit of fun with himself, as he described on his salsa. Is that a 1x now, Dave?
Yeah. I mean, I'd made that 1x a few years back, but yeah, it remains a 1x.
Yeah, so I'm sure that at some point Wheels Manufacturing was along for the ride on that project as well, somewhere in there. So this is a relatively common scenario for one by conversions, especially a few years ago before one by was like such a industry mainstay and so common when people were trying to make their own one by systems. Chainring spacing was definitely part of the game, a little bit of an art and a little bit of a science, and you kind of have to go by feel a little bit sometimes too. So
bit of trial
depending
and error.
if you're mixing, a little trial and error may come into play. But I would say you're a little bit too far outboard, and if you basically you want it as close to the center of your cassette range, you want that to be kind of basically where your chain is at its straightest point. So probably 1 to 2 gears higher up the cassette than you currently are.
For sure. Just add a few quick thoughts is if you are adding chainring spaces, you might need to consider longer chainring bolts to go with that, just to keep that thread engagement, because those bolts will probably see increased load given that the chainring won't be supported by the crank arm tabs at that point. So you want to probably
don't use aluminum.
Yeah, I was just going to say use steel bolts and make sure that they're long enough and really nice and tight. And then also on just thinking about that, in addition to Brad's noted issues of when the chainring is too far out, I'd also add in increased wear as an issue. Because, you're running that chain. The lateral wear is going to greatly increase because you're running the chain so at such a steep angle, but also the top of the teeth, that narrow wide chainring is probably going to get significantly worn through kind of grinding off the edges of it. So the chain retention won't last that long on that one if you're running it at such extremes. The other thing that is worth noting and has been a bit of a nuisance with some generations of Shimano, namely 11-speed one by, is when you're in those extreme gears and you like do a half pedal backwards, the chain can drop down the cassette because of the Chainline. So that's another little thing that you probably want to avoid, and it sounds like you're on the right path, John, by bringing that chainring more inboard. Good luck. Let us know how you go. All right. Well, that was Ask a Wrench. If you have a question, please head to escapecollective.com/hello. Introduce yourself. Tell us where you're from. Ask your question. Also, tell us what bike you're on, if it's related to the bike that you're talking about, because that can be quite helpful. Just a reminder that this is only available to our members of Escape Collective to ask such questions. Love to hear future ones. Before we wrap up, there is a bit of a list of tech that has come out in the last week, so we'll just quickly run through that. But before I do, I'll just give a quick reminder that we're now including a lot of tech, basically every day, in our daily news. So if you head to Escape Collective, you'll see the daily news article. It's typically pinned on the homepage, normally second or third spot. It covers all the latest things from racing and the world of cycling, but also you'll find tech within that. And Suvi, you agree? It's basically daily we're having tech in there?
It is. If there are tech news worth covering, and we've found them.
Yep. Feels
and
like
then
daily.
if you want to catch up at the end of the week, you can get through all the news in that one long piece. So it's quite handy.
Yes.
To get your daily digests.
It just that the one article just gets added to basically every day, and then at the end of a Monday, I think it starts fresh again. Not the end of Monday. On a Monday, it starts fresh again. So it's a good place to just jump in and get the brief side of everything, and a lot of these tech things like 1 to 2 paragraphs. So it's a light read, and should I say also available to non-members, so everyone can head there. All right. Well, with that, let's cover some of the news that you might have read in daily news, and some of the stuff I don't think has made it. So, first on the list, there's a new super aero bike, the Dare Velocity Ace. Suvi, you've watched the brand's video that tells us nothing about the bike. What can you tell us?
I mean, it might tell if a few looks would tell all about a bike. It's a lot of intense riding, intense music, and a lot of intense looks between the riders. Yeah, so it's I don't know what message Dare really wanted to convey with that video. Intensity, aero, like performance.
Yeah, I mean, there's not a huge amount to share on this bike. I think the main thing with it is it's like it's very clearly an all-out aero road bike. So, we're seeing a lot of the industry sort of converge on the one do-it-all aero bike, where it's not as aero as we perhaps have seen in the past, but this is not that. And this is, Brad, how would you describe the head tube?
Well, I questioned whether it was actually a UCI legal frame when I first saw it, because it's so dramatically deep. Like the section behind the head tube is, the depth of the frame before any evidence of a top or down tube emerging from that section, which is basically a large fairing behind the head tube, is like nothing I've really ever seen on a road bike before. It's more like what you might see sort of no holds barred triathlon kind of frame that's not governed by the UCI at all. So, quite a dramatic aero profile. I'm sure some ride quality, as we discussed earlier, may have been cast aside. But they did claim to have increased almost 12 watts drag saved over their previous aero bike. So they've been in the tunnel and measuring it. And I don't know that it's beautiful in my eyes, but it's quite a showstopper. I mean, it's like really kind of like nothing I've seen. So if you haven't seen one of these, see if you can maybe find a picture online, or we can maybe post something that
so
gets you there.
So our own Rona McLaughlin had spotted this in use previously under the Uno X mobility team, and looks like it's now official, and I guess we'll continue to see it out there. But if you are really into full aero road, then check out the Dare Velocity Ace. Next on the list, we've got Enduro have just announced their entry into solid polymer bearings, specifically for suspension pivot points. They've just got a handful of popular sizes at the moment. I suspect that size range will grow. This is kind of the very similar technology to like the SLT bearings from Ceramic Speed with that polymer-infill. Brad, do you want to just give an explainer on what that is?
I can do my best. Yeah, it's essentially, it's not like a common ball bearing. It's more like almost like a plastic material that essentially fills up the entirety of inner and outer race of a bearing, and embedded therein are the bearings, the balls themselves. But there's no like room for anything else. So like contaminants, water, dirt, there's kind of nowhere for it to go. And the polymer itself is self-lubricating, or has kind of a lower friction kind of texture to it. So the bearings themselves are not packed with grease like traditional bearings tend to be. And so that's basically how they work. My experience with bearings like this are in fact the Ceramic Speed version, which we did use both in suspension bearings as well as like headset bearings on mountain bikes, and they lasted so much longer. And they required basically no maintenance. We would kind of clean them, but it's not a lot of maintenance to do, because there isn't really grease to clean out and repack. So I think that's kind of their design, is to cut down on the maintenance interval for some of those harder to maintain bearing points on your bike. And I found them really also, and I'm sure Enduro is probably not far behind Ceramic Speed here either with this technology, as a headset bearing on bikes with integrated front ends where hoses route through the bearing, and changing a bearing out is, not such a simple task. I found that this is also a great application there, because it increases the lifespan of these bearings so dramatically. And these aren't bearings that are really spinning, where like maximum smoothness and efficiency are like the main goal, like they might be in a hub bearing or your bottom bracket bearing. And instead they rotate maybe not even a full 360 degrees when they're in use. A headset probably only turn it 30 to 40 degrees or so. And like some suspension bearings are like under 10 degrees of rotation. So, they're not moving that much, but they move a little bit. And what they are, you don't want any play back there, and you don't want them to be, like looseness, because when you have, it's kind of like when we talk about the ring of death, and you have some like loose fits, you can actually cause like other components that are associated to wear out. And I think a lot of suspension bikes are guilty of kind of neglecting suspension hardware maintenance, in my experience observing others' bicycles. And so I think that this is like a good kind of happy medium. It's obviously a high quality bearing in the first place, and it's one that requires kind of less frequent maintenance. And so if you're someone who doesn't love to rip their bike apart and does like to ride their bike a lot, this might buy you some time between major services. And
Sure.
In my experience, they've worked kind of, you don't notice a performance difference in terms of like what your bike feels like, but I can say they do last considerably longer. We were running them for a whole season in a frame, and never changing them, just cleaning them and
That's
kind of servicing the hardware, but never actually replacing them.
Yeah, that's cool.
Yeah.
Cool to hear, real world experiences. And, because when you say you're not changing bearings, I mean, traditionally at that level of the professional level of sport, I mean, you'd otherwise change bearings every 2 to 3 races or something like that?
Yep. Yeah, I would say so. Yeah. We'd at least be pulling them apart and cleaning them out and kind of repacking the bearings, which you can sometimes do if you haven't allowed them to like corrode or, they haven't actually worn where the kind of fit is a loose tolerance, between the ball and like the race, if it's gotten packed in with some nasty, muddy, gritty stuff in there. And then they kind of wear out very fast because they are very small bearings. So yeah, so it's exactly it. And that's kind of the point of that, the polymer infill that you describe. It's really like takes up all the room inside the bearing. So there's really not room for contaminants to even come into contact with the ball or the race. And therefore what you can't wear out the parts that do wear out. And so that's kind of the whole point. I've had good experience with Enduro in the past. I haven't seen these bearings in real life. I've seen their counterpart from Ceramic Speed, and I can say that was a quality product for sure. And I'm expect the Enduro ones to be as well.
Yep.
And I would also guess the Enduro ones might be a little bit less expensive because it tends to be the case versus Ceramic Speed. So
absolutely.
That's my guess.
They will be a cheaper option. So, keep an eye out for those. Enve have some new wheels, the M series wheels. So they've basically revamped almost their entire lineup of mountain bike wheels. They're lighter, they're shallower in the rim depth. They have wider beads on them for better impact resistance and probably less pinch flatting of the tires. And they're also cheaper than before. So yeah, the one that's probably what's relevant to a lot of our listeners is probably the cross-country version, which is the M5 Pro. It's now just 1,325 grams. And it's 29 internal front rim with a 27 mil internal rear rim, which is interesting in itself to have that difference. But yeah, I think that pretty cool looking wheel set, competitive in weight, and seeing prices come down is always positive. So
yeah, wheels used to be a lot more expensive than this.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm not sure where the cost cutting is coming from because nothing else seems to be getting any cheaper these days. But we've actually seen some pretty high quality, reputable brand wheel sets that are like $500 to $800 cheaper than they were like 5 years ago.
Yep. So competition is a good thing in this space because it is driving prices down. So, also new, Daysaver, the Swiss company that's best known for its really cool modular multi-tools, has announced that they're joining the world of mini pumps. So they're going to have 2 sizes of mini pumps. These ones seem to be inspired by One-Up, and more recently Wolftooth has also joined the game by offering mini pumps that can stash your multi-tool. And these are sort of the third player in that space. And the cool feature that I'm keen to try out is a pump head that you can fit straight onto the valve, or you can use their adapter hose. So you can choices. It looks like a cool pump. Daysaver is pretty premium in terms of pricing. This one will kickstart. They do crowdfunding for these before they hit the market. So you'll be able to get better pricing by jumping on Kickstarter and looking up Daysaver if you want one of these. I think they're only due out sometime next year, but looks like a cool product. And lucky last for the week is the Body Rocket on-bike aero sensor. It is finally available for purchase. This is something that I won't get into in the details because I'm going to leave it to Ronan, who will have a deep dive on this in the near future. It seems like we're coming to an age of the aero sensors, which have been spoken about on Geek Warning for years and years and years. It seems like they're starting to become more and more commercially available. I think it's an interesting space. It's not a space I'm really particularly likely to bolt an aero sensor on, but for those looking to optimize their speed and figure out what's best for them, these things make a lot of sense and perhaps money well spent.
Yeah, aero stuff is it's kind of like a less exciting thing to think about than like upgrading your bike, at least for me, and probably for you, Dave, too. It's not quite as technically involved, but so I worked for a number of years at Specialized on their pro side of life, which was mostly mountain bikes, but was also heavy in triathlon. Many of us are probably aware that Specialized has their own wind tunnel, and we spent a lot of time in there with athletes across all disciplines, including mountain bikes, even downhill. But of course, mostly in triathlon, where you're spending a lot of time on the bike in one position and really trying to optimize that, because those watts here and there really add up. And when you extrapolate over a few hours, it really, really adds up. And the aerodynamic gains and the way they can be achieved and how much you can gain with very little, sometimes just a slight change in your position on the bike or a little changes in how you wear your hair or, stuff like that. I mean, the actual, the correlation of time saved over a set distance is probably more than any other way you can achieve gains of that magnitude. No technical, equipment based changes, electronic shifting, all this stuff. It's so fancy and new, doesn't amount to much in that kind of time saved department. But aero gains are really tremendously available to almost every cyclist. And so, although I agree with you, this is something that I don't know if I really want to put this on my bike. I'm sure there are people out there who do and will see a lot of gains from having spent some time tweaking their aerodynamics on their bike, because it's a huge frontier that's been hard to really
for sure
prove until now.
And yeah, I mean, this technology it's a tool, and it's only going to be good if you're willing to invest the time in using it correctly and doing those back-to-back tests. And I guess that's where I lose interest. but Ronan's all about it.
Oh, 100%. It's right up Ronan's alley, but it's kind of like in a similar way, power meters, 15 or so years ago to now, it used to be kind of reserved for the most geeky person that you knew, maybe would have an SRM and be constantly sending it back to get it recalibrated and have its battery changed out at the factory, all this stuff. And it's who would ever want one of these things? I have a feeling a sensor like this might undergo a similar evolution to a point where it's almost as easy as just pairing it to your head unit and getting the data, in real time at some point down the road. So this may just be the tip of the iceberg in this department, but I think it's something that is a worthy pursuit because the gains are very real.
Indeed. Certainly one to watch, and keep an eye out for Ronan. I suspect it'll be under the Performance Process branding, this one. But yeah, I believe he's got a deep dive coming, even in a podcast format, if I'm not mistaken. All right. Well, yeah, I mean, that's the news for the week. And that means that's the episode for the week. Thanks to everyone for tuning in. And as a reminder, Escape Collective is wholly and solely funded by our members, and it's what makes this podcast possible. So if you love this podcast and you're not already a member, please consider joining escapecollective.com/member. It'll give you access to everything we do. We are going to keep this podcast free for all, but we are increasing the amount of member-exclusive content that we're offering. So, for example, my threaded series of tools and bike maintenance tips and servicing tips, that has moved behind a paywall for our members. And just about weekly, we're doing member-exclusive podcasts as well, which get really geeky and offer some pretty unique advice and insight into how bikes are made and design decisions behind them. So, don't miss out. All right, Brad, Suvi, good to chat to you. Brad, I think you're off next week. Is that right?
I'm off next week, Dave.
All right, sitting it out. All right. Well, Suvi, it might just be the two of us. We might even see if Alex, another new tech hire to Escape, whether he gets a microphone in time to say hello. But we'll see. But we'll figure that out. All right, until next week, cheers.